Weapons have existed as long as humankind. For millennia, they have determined the destiny of generations. Weapons bring suffering and death. They show what humans can inflict upon other humans. But they're also intended to keep the peace and pave new ways for technology. Rule the skies and you'll win wars. For thousands of years, men have developed new weapons for attacking from above. These three have made history. Astonishing experiments will uncover the secret of their deadly efficiency. Aerial bombs have marked modern warfare to this day.
How easy is it to hit a target on the ground?
Rockets. They have been deployed in wars for centuries and have turned into the biggest threat of our time.
It's scary to imagine standing here with the arrows raining down.
Incendiary arrows have served as wonder weapons since ancient times.
No one would have heard it, no one would have seen it coming until the house is fully ablaze.
Ignite an arrow and fire it. Sounds easy. But in reality, incendiary arrows are a masterstroke of weapons technology. Fire provides light, warmth, life. Since the beginning of our time, human history has always revolved around fire. And as long as mankind has benefited from all that fire can give, they have made use of the fact that it can also take.
Fire is one of the oldest weapons. It terrifies primitive creatures like humans and always has done. If you watch a troop of chimpanzees running from fire and you watch a troop of humans running from fire, you're watching the same thing. We haven't lost that primeval fear of fire.
Incendiary arrows prove particularly effective in sieges of cities or fortresses. But how can the arrow stay ablaze while it's soaring through the air? Weapons expert Mike Lodes is about to find out at the medieval center in the Danish harbour town of Nykøbing Falster.
So today we're used to the idea of death and destruction coming from the skies. Bombs and missiles raining terror on cities, of cities in flames. But cities in flames, that's as old as when men fought with the bow and arrow, because they used incendiary arrows.
Even up to the late medieval era, many peoples built their houses from wood and covered their roofs with straw, an easy target for an incendiary attack. We want to know how the fire reaches its goal. Our expert goes for the easiest option first.
So I've just tied an ordinary bit of cloth around this to see what it does, see if it stays alight.
A failed attempt with a clear result.
Yeah, well, obviously it's no surprise that it didn't stay alight. We could barely get it alight to start with. So they clearly had a different idea than just tying a bit of rag around it.
Our search to uncover the secret of incendiary arrows leads us to a traditional smithy. Blacksmith Jens Christiansen works on the essential part of the weapon, an iron head. In order to be able to carry the fire over long distances, it has to be forged in a very precise manner.
It's always a thrill to work with a blacksmith. They are taking iron, which starts as a bit of rock in the earth, and they're making things, elaborate shapes. He's also using his eye to judge the temperature. His eye is a thermometer. The color of the flames tells him how hot it is, and he needs it to be hot to split it. He needs it to be a different temperature, hotter, to forge it. So he's making all sorts of judgments.
The forge welding of the 4 pieces in the basket, it needs to be exactly at the point. If you get the heat too far down, you will forge weld the whole thing into a solid piece and you cannot make the baskets.
Jens Christiansen is forming a small basket out of the 4 iron branches that will later hold an incendiary composition. This is what makes an arrow an incendiary arrow.
So here is the nearly finished incendiary arrow. This is the cage which the incendiary material goes into. It doesn't have to be an exact size because it's just to hold things. All that matters is that the socket will fit on the arrow. It's got a point, so it's going to stick into something when it arrives because it will take time for this to set anything alight. But that's it. It's as simple as that.
Are you okay with this?
Beautiful work as ever, Jens. It's simple, it's elegant, and it's ingenious. But you know, in the whole history of violence, there cannot be a crueler idea than killing people by burning them to death.
You're absolutely right.
And there it is. The missile is armed with its warhead and ready to go.
Assyrians, Romans, Teutons, Saracens. Almost all triumphant warriors use incendiary arrows. Those who master the elaborate manufacturing technique have a real advantage in war.
An archer with an incendiary arrow can do the work of 50, 100 archers because if his arrow stays alight, if it hits its target, if the fire starts, then the fire will spread. You need no more arrows.
The Isle of Rhodes, 305 BCE. In a bit of fight over Alexander the Great's legacy, thousands of soldiers have built siege towers before the walls of the city. But the Rhodians defend themselves with burning arrows.
You have to protect siege equipment like mobile towers from incendiary arrows and incendiary compositions. Sometimes this was achieved with metal plates or by putting up the hides of freshly skinned animals, attaching the flesh side to the exterior walls of the towers to prevent them from catching fire.
The siege towers are set ablaze nevertheless. The attack has failed. The Rhodians erect the famous Colossus of Rhodes to honor their sun god Helios. They owe their victory to incendiary arrows. The iron head on the arrow is only part of its secret. What's inside the basket is critical. Mike Lodes and Jens Christiansen know which substances are most suitable for the incendiary composition. This knowledge often determines the outcome of ancient and medieval conflicts. Chemistry decides on victory and defeat, or rather, alchemy. That is the name of this science in the ancient world. The earliest written records are from Egypt. For incendiary arrows, knowledge about pitch, sulfur, and carbon is essential.
The origins of alchemy can be traced back to the moments in history where people were actively looking into different materials and consciously trying to combine them. You'll find the first examples of men experimenting with sulfur in the Neolithic period. That's where it all began.
Alchemists also do a lot of research for weapons development. Around the year 1000, experiments with sulfur lead to the invention of black powder in China. In fact, many of the groundbreaking findings of the past were unplanned.
They did a lot of experimenting, of course, and obviously they stumbled upon discoveries. Take pyrite, for example. It's basically fool's gold, and if you heat it, it starts to produce fumes. These fumes condensate on a cold surface, and you get sulfur. It's amazing what you can discover when you're not even looking.
Countless experiments over many centuries. The alchemists make discoveries that will go down in history. Their knowledge is protected like state secrets. This is also how Mike Lodes and Jens Christiansen know what kind of incendiary composition is needed for their iron basket. Pitch, sulfur, deadwood, and hemp ensure that the arrow keeps burning.
And then, for good measure, we could dip that in tar.
The last step. Now the weapon is ready for action. Will it be possible to set fire to the target thanks to the incendiary composition in the iron head? Mike Loades wants to put that to the test.
So this is the arrow that I made with Jens. So it's got the sulfur at its core. Around that is the dead wood, and then on the outside is the toe dipped in tar. So we've got the tar going, the pitch is going on the outside. Let's see how it will perform. Hopefully that's getting hot enough to get the dead wood lit inside. Well, look at that. It's actually taking. That house is going to burn. And if this was a night raid, the soft tap of that arrow into that roof, no one would have heard it, no one would have seen it coming until the house is fully ablaze. It's a most vicious form of warfare, a terrible terror attack to drive the citizens from the city, to make them turn against their overlords and give up and open the gates.
The wooden house with its straw roof will be destroyed within 2 minutes of the fire attack from above. An elaborate arrowhead and a sticky incendiary mix, a millennia-old technique deployed in countless conflicts.
It started as a single incendiary arrow. Look at it now, look at that blaze. It was a silent attack, and within minutes, the whole structure is ablaze. Absolute terror.
An effective medieval weapon. Not only does it get the job done on land, but also on water. For centuries, the biggest threats in naval warfare are neither grappling hooks nor cannons, but incendiary arrows.
Medieval ships are made of wood and pitch and are highly flammable. And a lot of the sailors during the Middle Ages couldn't swim. So they faced a pretty grim choice between either drowning or burning to death.
Throughout the 20th century, progress in the chemical industry brings about ever more effective incendiary weapons. They are called thermite, phosphor, napalm, and bring real hellfire to earth.
Napalm is actually an abbreviation for naphthenic acid and palmitic acid, napalm. If you mix it with gasoline, you produce a very sticky and extremely flammable mass.
Even the tiniest drops of this incendiary composite can burn through every layer of skin, right down to the flesh within seconds.
You basically measure the expansion or the percentage of the body surface that's affected by these severe, profound burns. Napalm can penetrate the skin very deeply down to the subcutaneous fatty tissue or even the muscles. It's already considered life-threatening when burns are sustained to 30% of the skin's surface. At 50%, the chance of survival is very, very slim.
The Vietnam War draws the world's attention to the disastrous effects of napalm. On the 8th of June 1972, the then 9-year-old Vietnamese girl, Kim Phuc, suffers severe burns in a US napalm airstrike. It's a miracle that she survives. The photograph of the napalm girl is used as a symbol worldwide in support of anti-war attitudes and leads to the Americans accelerating their withdrawal from Vietnam. For Kim Phuc, the scars on her skin forever serve as a reminder of the terrible pain she endured on that fateful day. The use of napalm against civilian populations was banned by the United Nations in 1980. Historically speaking, the most important incendiary weapons were incendiary arrows. Their era ends as firearms conquer the battlegrounds. At the time, new and more effective weapons for the attack from above are already available. Rockets. Their history dates back to the Middle Ages and takes us to the Far East. It is the year 1232. The Mongols are attacking the Jin Empire in North China. During the siege of Kaifeng, the Chinese finally deploy a weapon that their opponents have never been confronted with before. The Chinese, however, are already familiar with it, but for a whole different purpose.
The Chinese had used gunpowder and fireworks before, but in the past, only to scare away evil spirits.
It can scare away evil spirits. Why not evil enemies as well? The Chinese aim bamboo canes filled with gunpowder at the fast-approaching invaders. While the military impact is negligible, the psychological effect is powerful. The rocket attack produces noise and dense smoke. The Mongol horses balk and bolt. The attackers withdraw for the time being.
The rocket is a very effective weapon, not because it kills people, but because it terrifies horses. And the main enemy of China throughout history has been nomadic horse armies coming down from the north, the Mongols, the Huns. So the rocket is a really good weapon for the Chinese because it attacks the thing that makes the enemy dangerous, their mobility, their speed, their ability to outmaneuver the Chinese.
Trugleben, Thuringia, Germany. Weapons expert Wolfgang Staber is building an advanced rocket, originally developed in Korea in the 15th century. The rocket, called Washa, is much more than just psychological warfare. It can fire up to 100 deadly projectiles simultaneously. The first rocket launcher in history.
You can hardly imagine that such a small cart with so many arrows has such a disastrous effect.
Wolfgang Staber and his team set up the rocket as one would have done in the old days, manually. A paper tube filled with black powder is attached to ordinary arrows. When the black powder is ignited, the recoil pushes the rocket forwards with explosive power, up to 500 meters. In our experiment, we are using balloons to represent the enemy's formation. The trick of the Korean Washa is its ignition mechanism. One man can fire 100 arrows at the same time.
The ignition technique is quite simple. This main fuse cord ignites the first row. If that one starts to burn, the second fuse ignites the second row. That means the ones up here will already be going off parallel to this row, so the last one will be that one down there.
But will the principle work in our experiment? At the end of the 16th century, Koreans are opposing a Japanese invasion. The Japanese send their samurai battalions, fighting in fixed formations. The ideal target for the Washa rocket missiles, in theory. In our test setting, the success is modest.
Well, that's a result. I didn't quite hit the target, but at the end of the day, I'd say it was a dangerous weapon.
The recoil principle has worked. The weapon is sophisticated.
To be honest, this really scares me. If I stood here and arrows rained down on me, I think I'd just run away. And I have no idea where they'll land. All in all, quite a potent weapon. Not perfectly accurate, but one single man can fire 100 arrows in the blink of an eye.
Our Washa replica has fired all of its 100 rockets. We probably could not have taken down attacking samurais with our experiment. But in reality, armies did not use just one Washa, but dozens of them. Their effect will thwart the plans of Japanese General Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He wants to invade the Korean peninsula at the end of the 16th century. The Korean troops fiercely opposed the Japanese during the long Imjin War. Throughout this conflict, with the help of their Washas, the Koreans are repeatedly successful in stopping the Japanese. Hengju, February 1593. 3,000 Koreans are facing 10,000 Japanese soldiers.
What they did was defend themselves with 40 washers, firing several thousand arrows at the Japanese. They fled the territory, resulting in a stunning victory for the Koreans.
The Europeans get to know the Asian rocket technology in India and learn to fear it.
In the 18th century, the English encountered Indian rockets. These were quite powerful. They had metal cases, and if they hit something like a man or a horse, they could be quite dangerous.
British General William Congreve continues developing the weapon and soon receives support from other generals.
It's a cheap, light, man-portable bombardment device. Unlike an artillery piece, which needs a large crew to move it and to operate it because it's heavy, the rocket, it's a self-contained fire-and-forget weapon. All you need is a few bits of wood to make a ramp, and you just fire it.
The Congreve rocket is not a multiple rocket launcher like the Hwasha, but when it hits a target, it explodes and releases sharp metal shards. Our next test.
We've adapted a real rocket to ensure that it no longer poses a danger to us. Small parts made of plastic, not metal like the original. And for the shrapnel effect, we use peas. They're less dangerous.
Again, gunpowder triggers the crucial recoil effect. Yet what makes this rocket so special is the combination of explosive and propellant. That's what makes it so perilous. Therefore, Wolfgang Staber endeavors to build us a safe version.
The rocket is ready, and it's just as explosive as the original back in the 19th century. Let's go and witness the bang.
But is there a way of knowing how high and how far the weapon will fire once it's up in the air? Where will the detonation take place? We need to do a test run.
This is exactly how they did it in the past. They used a tripod of sorts where they could adjust the angle, but they had to try and observe the trajectory. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to make a targeted shot. We'll do the same, make some warm-up shots, then we'll set up our targets.
Wolfgang Staber resorts to remote ignition to be on the safe side.
This way we can fire the rocket from a safe distance, because I don't know where it will go. It could also blow up in our faces.
The homemade rocket is in position. Wolfgang Staber connects it to the ignition cable. Now we're all set.
3, 2, 1. There was some crosswind, so it drifted off a little. But we're at the distance that we need, and I think we can see some results this way. We'll set up a few targets at a safe distance.
Man-sized balloons will once again take the place of our enemy. The plan is to make the rocket hit them right in the middle and explode.
A real-world experiment. Over there are the attackers, our balloons. Here's the rocket ready to be fired.
Will the single rocket be more effective than the projectile downpour of the Hwasha?
All safe? I'm counting down. 3, 2, 1, and fire.
And it's working. The rocket explodes exactly where it's supposed to. In a real battle, it would have shot metal shards through the air, not peas.
It went right down into the middle of them. As a soldier, you probably wouldn't even notice it. And you can see where all the shreds go, in our case, the peas, and they destroy everything within a 5-meter radius. Nasty.
Unlike our replica, the 19th century Congreve rocket has a metal casing. Its deployment in battle is devastating, especially when fired in salvos of hundreds at a time.
This is our shrapnel because we couldn't use metal here. But what we can see is that even these tiny peas fly so far that they're able to destroy the balloons. Just imagine being hit by shrapnel like that.
Congreve keeps developing these weapons to make them more accurate, with more accurate charges, by moving the stick so it's central rather than on one side, and increasing the size so it can carry a payload of several kilos, incendiary or explosive warhead. And these will be used right the way through the 19th century in Britain's wars of empire as the only way of getting heavy weapons onto target in difficult areas.
Congreve rockets are also used in the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, the largest military encounter of the 19th century with more than 600,000 soldiers. While Napoleon is attacking the Prussians and their allies, a British rocket brigade comes to their aid.
It hit the group right in the center, between the soldiers, between the cavalry, exploding like shrapnel, hurting or killing many people. A brutal effect.
The effect of these early rockets on the battlefield is so impressive that it will go down in one of history's best-known national anthems.
Congreve's rockets achieved notoriety in the American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, which refers to the rocket's red glare and the bombs in the air. It was written by Francis Scott Key, who watched the British bombard Baltimore with rockets and mortars in 1814. And he wrote the piece the next morning when all of these incendiary fireworks had failed to drive the Americans out of Baltimore. They put the rocket into the heart of every American because they all know the words.
Rockets can be more than just effective weapons. An American engineer and inventor sees their potential early on. US physicist Robert Goddard claims as early as 1919 that it will soon be possible for men to reach the moon with the help of rockets. No one wants to believe him, until Goddard launches the first rocket fueled with gasoline and liquid oxygen.
Aus heutiger Sicht würde man wahrscheinlich sagen,
From our point of view today, you would probably say that the experiment failed because the rocket rose into the air for no more than 2.5 seconds. Nevertheless, it was a groundbreaking success, since it was the first ever liquid-fueled rocket. This revolutionized rocket propellant technology.
Raketenantriebs revolutioniert.
Goddard's subsequent rocket launches, like this one in New Mexico in 1930, are more successful. His most essential finding: when using a liquid propellant, the recoil mechanism can even work in a vacuum. That means in space. Robert Goddard doesn't live to see the first trip to outer space. He, however, set the standards. Liquid propellant is here to stay. Once again, war accelerates progress. Peenemünde, at the Baltic Sea coast of Germany. Scientists design new weapons for Hitler. They developed the first functioning cruise missile in history, called the V-1, a flying bomb with wings and pulse jet engine. The V-1 is a German terror weapon, most frequently deployed against the residents of London.
It has a fuel supply limit, which means when it's flown a certain distance, it cuts out and crashes. That distance is from the launch base to central London. So they're used to bombard London. And quite quickly, the British work out these things are slow and quite cumbersome. And the best thing to do is to get some fighter planes up there and literally tip them over. So the British fighters fly alongside and literally just lift the wing and tip this thing out of balance, and it crashes to the ground in the fields before it gets to London.
A more terrifying successor soon follows the wing bomb that bears the name Vengeance Weapon 1. The engineer behind the new weapon is Werner von Braun. His rocket has an operational altitude of 100 kilometers, the boundary between our atmosphere and outer space. At the time, this marked an unprecedented achievement. The V-2 is operational by September 1944. While the V-1 could be heard and sirens could warn the population, the V-2 drops silently down on London. It's a supersonic rocket. Its deployment claims about 8,000 lives.
Fortunately, the British have worked out the best answer to this is to misreport the impacts. So they're reporting the impacts as being much further away than they actually are. And so the Germans adjust their targeting and fire them into fields. Because the Germans can't get any reconnaissance over Britain to see where they're impacting, they're reading the newspapers, and the newspapers are not telling the truth.
But the V2 does not only claim victims in England. Prisoners in the Dora-Mittelbau concentration camp, Germany, are forced to build the weapon under inhumane conditions. When the US forces liberate the camp, they stumble upon terrible sights. For the rocket program, more than 20,000 prisoners lost their lives due to forced labor.
Paradoxically, far more people died when manufacturing the weapon than as a result of its actual deployment.
Hitler's rocket pioneer is not held accountable after the war. He migrates to the US and develops ever more potent rockets.
And then we have a rocket arms race in which the two superpowers go around boasting that their missile is bigger than the other guy's missile.
4th of October 1957, the Soviet Union sends the first artificial satellite into space. The message is clear. We can attack any place on Earth with a rocket like this. During the Cold War, East and West could have annihilated their enemies several times over with their arsenal of nuclear bombs.
What are they telling us? You know, this is overt display. You know, look at me, look at what I can do. What you would have done in the old days with a big army and a large navy and some fabulous aeroplanes, you now do with a rocket. The rocket is your stand-up symbol.
And one of the biggest threats of our time. The greatest suffering in the wars of the 20th century, however, is not caused by rockets, but by another weapon deployed from the skies, the aerial bomb. More than 3 tons of explosives are dropped from the skies. Whole cities are ravaged. The history of bombing begins in the Italian War of Independence in 1849. Venice fights against Austria. Field Marshal Radetzky faces a problem. He can't reach Venice with his current arsenal. The Austrian cannonballs all end up in the water. In the summer of 1849, they find a way. Explosives attached to balloons hover over the lagoon city. It is the first airborne bomb attack in history.
I don't think it's even possible to imagine the terror that went through people's minds when a bomb dropped from above. It's coming from the sky. Where do we go? There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere place to hide. It's falling on us and we can't do anything about it. And for that to have happened for the first time, so people didn't know what it was, people didn't know how to protect themselves.
Venice is struck by cholera. People are hit by famine. The balloon bombs are the tipping point. The city surrenders. That the explosives actually hit their target, however, was just a stroke of luck for Austria.
The concept of a balloon bomb is, of course, complete nonsense. Even if I knew the exact wind conditions in the place where I want to drop the bomb, they could be totally different 100 meters away or in another atmospheric layer. Wind reacts differently at different altitudes, so technically this was not a very good idea.
Airplanes offer more accuracy. At the beginning of the 20th century, powered airplanes make their debut. In December 1903, the Wright brothers have their big breakthrough, the first powered flight. Kitty Hawk floats in the air for 59 seconds. It catches the military's attention in no time. Giulio Gavotti is a pilot in the Italo-Turkish War in Libya. On the 1st of November 1911, he drops 4 grenades from his airplane. They explode, but no one gets hurt. Gavotti is the first man to make an aerial bombardment. Bulgarian captain Simeon Petrov is the first to refine the idea. Knowing that ordinary grenades just tumble to the ground, he develops a more effective type of bomb.
The more clever you were in designing the fins and the nose cone of the bomb, the more accurate it would be, the more likely it was to hit the target you were aiming at rather than just land on the ground somewhere. So bomb design is not just about the thing that goes bang, it's about the bit that gets it to the ground accurately and precisely.
Petrov's aerial bomb is the first of its kind and gains worldwide popularity. It is initially deployed in 1912. The fins make the new bomb travel aerodynamically and stabilize it in the air, even if it's dropped manually like in World War I. Our next experiment. Together with historian Stephen Bull, we want to simulate the aiming process of World War I pilots.
These are copies of some of the bombs from the First World War, and the weight is probably as much as one man can handle conveniently. If you go much heavier than this, you're going to need better technology.
How accurate can a bomb be dropped manually? A red cross on an airfield is our target.
So just how easy is it to hit a target on the ground from a moving aircraft by throwing a bomb over the side of the plane? We're about to find out.
The rules are simple. Above the target, the aerial bomb is dropped by eye. An experienced airplane crew provides support for Stephen Bull. Once the bomb models are loaded, they will rise to an altitude of 400 meters.
So we're inside the bombing aircraft now. This is an Antonov A2 biplane. So its characteristics are quite similar to some of the First World War aircraft that would have been used to drop bombs. This plane can fly very slowly. In fact, if the wind speed is strong, it can appear to be stationary. The downside is that we have to keep the door open, so it's going to be quite exciting.
The machine gains altitude and accelerates to 150 kilometers an hour. Conditions similar to those during an airstrike in World War I.
They've got the bomb ready in position, and the guys are in the doorway.
A little bit more to the right before maintaining their position and altitude.
Bomb's in the doorway. They're looking for the cross. I'm looking for the cross. Bomb's away. I'm trying to see where it's landed. I'm really not sure how close to the target we were.
The bomb was successfully dropped by eye. But has it hit its intended target? How close did we get to the actual cross?
So according to an eyewitness, the bomb is round about here somewhere. There's the remains of plaster and the central section of the bomb and the fins, and it's actually embedded in the ground, I would have thought 20, 30 centimetres. Yep, and there is the nose of the bomb, and the fins really are no longer fins, so it's completely mangled. If it had been full of explosives, you wouldn't even have this much left. Quite a mess.
Our bomb dummy has hit the ground about 90 meters off target.
I think we've done reasonably well, but even so, if this was a small group of men we'd been aiming at, we'd have missed it.
The results obtained by World War I pilots were likely pure luck. Hitting a target by eye alone is already a huge challenge, even in the best of weather conditions. If there are storm winds, it is futile to even go up in the air. Nevertheless, the weather has always been a decisive factor for the military. During the D-Day landing operation in Normandy in 1944, the Allies are waiting to start the liberation of Europe. The US meteorologists predict a short anticyclone for the 6th of June, a golden opportunity since the Germans are expecting more rain. The Allies invade and surprise the German soldiers. Despite large losses, the landing is successful. Weather has also played a major role in the outcome of medieval wars. Many commanders-in-chief avoid going to battle in rainy conditions. A muddy battleground is disadvantageous for both sides. Crécy, 1346. In the first major land battle between France and England in the 100 Years' War, the enemies take to the fields despite the bad weather. But France's crossbow shooters struggle in the rain. The strings are too wet. The ground is too slippery for the shooters to get a solid standing.
The inability to control the weather is probably one of the most frustrating and draining and psychologically damaging aspects of war.
But how well can you factor in wind and weather? We want to give it another try, dropping a bomb manually, but taking the wind into account.
What you may not realise is that the bomb will be leaving the aircraft at the same speed as the aircraft is moving. So we're going to have to judge carefully the distance between the release and the target.
We place a white cross 375 meters away from the red cross. The bomb has to be dropped from this position to land within the red. According to our calculations regarding altitude, speed, air resistance, and the weight of the bomb, this is the perfect place to release it.
I'm very close to a 400-metre drop, and I just don't want to get any closer. He's looking for the cross.
The white cross is directly underneath us.
Bomb's away. But I really don't know where they've gone yet.
Did the bomb get closer to the target than the first time? Back on solid ground, Stephen Bull begins to search for our bomb. Not as easy as it seems.
I've got one! I've got a bomb! I can feel the tail fins. It's about half a metre down.
The impact site is about 50 meters off target, an improvement compared to the first trial.
Can I pull it out? It's buried so hard and so deep. We'll need 2 men, 3 men, and a spade. Okay.
The dummy bomb has dug deep into the ground, nose first. A dud from a real attack would be comparably deeply buried and comparably difficult to find.
Okay, so we've been using a strong guy and a shovel, and it's an hour later, and we still can't shift this bomb. But we can be sure that it was one that was put here by means of calculation, aimed at the white aiming mark from above, and fell near to our target area, the Red Cross. So maths can help. But during the First World War, it was both luck and judgment.
It isn't until World War II that bombings become more accurate. Making use of targeted dives, German bombers like the Junkers 87 are able to hit their targets within a radius of a couple of meters. Improved targeting devices and the new strategy of carpet bombing are a game changer. With bigger machines and an increasing number of bombs, the Germans attack city centers and industrial zones. Bombs rain down on Warsaw, Rotterdam, and Coventry. Then the British and American bombers strike back. Both sides are hit hard. Entire cities soon lay in ashes. Houses turn to rubble. 600,000 people die. The killing of civilians is not collateral damage. It is actively planned. Commander-in-Chief of the British Bomber Command, Arthur Harris, wants to demoralize the German population.
Moral bombing is used in a targeted manner to demoralize civilian populations on both sides. Human losses were consciously factored in as a means to achieve one's military objectives.
The Allies' bombardments are not accurate. Dropped on densely populated cities, however, the downpour of bombs hits apartment buildings even without precise target calculations. There's a deadly strategy behind the bombardments. First, explosive bombs are dropped to demolish the roofs and windows of apartment buildings and houses. These bombs are followed by phosphorus and thermite incendiary bombs to ensure that the now unprotected buildings catch fire. The firefighter squads are in for another shock. Some of the bombs have time fuses. Trying to extinguish the fires is life-threatening. Hamburg is hit by Operation Gomorrah in the summer of '43. The British bombers initially target the city centre and the port before moving on to the eastern part of the city, a working-class neighbourhood. An inferno rages in the city. More than 30,000 people perish.
I can see how people, if they're being bombed, want the war to end, and they want the war to end immediately. However, what happens generally is that people build up more anger and resentment against the enemy. If they've lost their loved ones, if they're being bombed continually, all it does is create more anger, more trauma, and more despair.
The moral bombing attempts fail. The Germans' will to persevere is not weakened by the bombardments. Quite on the contrary.
Essentially, the incompetence of strategic bombing early in the war led to a reduction in the moral standards of targeting. Something that no soldier on the ground would think was acceptable, the random killing of civilians, became standard practice for air forces. All air forces, anybody will just drop some bombs. Once you get there, bomb them.
The barbarity reaches a new climax in aerial warfare over Japan. Tokyo, 9th of March 1945. The majority of the city is destroyed. More than 100,000 people die in the attack, more than in the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Time and time again, the aerial bomb returns to countless war theaters after 1945. Be it Vietnam or Syria, the aerial bomb remains the standard weapon for the attack from above. The airplanes carrying the bombs, however, change. Not to protect civilians, but rather the pilots. Originally designed for observation, drones can silently drop bombs at command and are completely unmanned.
Pilots are fallible, they're very expensive to carry in airplanes. They double the size of the airplane. Their life support systems eat up space and burn fuel. The fact that we've taken the pilot out of the airplane doesn't change anything. It's still a human choice.
During an attack, the drone pilots are located in the safe confines of command centers, situated far from the war itself.
That person who's operating that machinery still has to have that moral dilemma and still has to try and justify their actions to themselves in order to go through that psychological process of dealing with the act of killing, which is essentially still what it is.
The drone pilots see what happens after the bomb has been dropped, and they know that they were the ones to push the button.
Drones don't kill people, people kill people using drones. That's where we are. If we tip over and give artificial intelligence a role in making those decisions, that's a whole different thing. But we haven't got there, and I don't think we're going that way just yet.
The attack from above. Mankind has let fire rain down from the skies for thousands of years, like the Lord did on Sodom and Gomorrah.